Elderly Dogman and Pup. Dear Bigfoot, care of Scary Stories NYC. My father and grandfather were coal miners in northwestern Pennsylvania in the 20th century, and both of them told me stories of Tommyknockers down deep underground. That's why, when I saw a really big and really old dogman back then, I at first called it a Tommyknocker. I knew it wasn't a Bigfoot, because it had this head that looked more like a dog or a wolf than anything else. I might have thought it was an old pointed-eared mutant bear, except that whenever any of us saw it, it was always walking around with a little dog that we all referred to as its grandson. Now looking back on it, I suspect that I was looking at a dogman and its grandson for real. But since I have no film of any of the sightings, I can't really say for sure. Let me tell you what I remember and see what you think about all this. My family moved around a bit in those days, but wherever we moved, my dad's miner friend Smokey moved with us, and so did his son Shorty, who was my best friend. Sometimes they even lived with us for a while until they could find their own place again, but they were always nearby. Basically, my father and Smokey were these sort of self-styled intellectual coal miners. Like they actually referred to themselves as proletariat. I'm not even joking. They were union members, and at least to some degree, they seem to have been agitators for change. I imagine that's why they were always getting fired and always getting new jobs, and we were always moving. But work was never discussed with us kids, and I'm not even sure how much was shared with my mom. Shorty's mom had passed away when I was very young, and I don't have any memories of her. So during this period, Smokey and Shorty were living in the room upstairs in a former barn that the previous owners had converted into a garage with an upstairs bedroom. This structure was in the yard behind our old rundown farmhouse that we were renting. Soon after we moved in, Shorty started telling me that he and his dad were seeing a big old booger walking around at night, and that we should make sure to lock up the house at night so that the oversized critter didn't get in and eat us out of house and home. Or just eat us. I wondered how big this dog was, and I passed the message on to my parents that there might be large scavengers trying to break in at night. I didn't think too much more about it until I had a sighting of my own. Like I said, when I saw that thing, the first thing I thought was that must be what a Tommyknocker looks like if it comes above ground. And since nobody in my family ever saw a Tommyknocker, they only heard them, I can't say for sure. Maybe the Dogman is the Tommyknocker, I just don't know. But if they are, then Tommyknockers are mammals. Mammals who take care of raising their young. I know that because I saw the young Dogman before I even saw the large old one. Here's the way it happened. I went out back to sleep upstairs in the barn with my friend Shorty and my dad's friend Smokey. We all told scary stories after dinner and stayed up late, looking around outside the barn for the giant booger monster that they'd been seeing. He didn't come around that night, and we all soon fell asleep in chairs by windows watching outside in the night. When I woke up, the sky was just beginning to start to turn colors with the dawn. I had never seen such a sky, and I yawned and I stretched, and I got up to enjoy the show of the constantly changing colors of the sunrise. Downstairs outside, I saw a little young dog playing around, and I became interested in its funny antics. It would chase a flying bug, then get distracted by a colorful rock, then run off to chase a helicopter high in the sky. The puppy was making me chuckle, and I resolved to go down there and play with it. But just a split second before I was about to head down to ground level, around the corner of the outside of the barn, walked the freaking Bumble from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Do you know what I mean? That kid's Christmas special from the 60s? The big white monster in it. The abominable snowman. Well, a nasty old beat-up looking version of that walked around the corner of the barn, casually leaned down, picked the puppy up in one hand, and walked off with him. I thought he was going to eat the pup, but then instead he just plopped the little guy up on his right shoulder, and off he trotted, off the property and into the pre-dawn woods surrounding it. I tell you, when it came around that barn corner, its head was only about a foot below the level of the second-story barn window that I was looking out of. So how tall did it have to be? Over 10 feet tall at least. Probably more like 12. If that monster was that size in his young prime, he would have been big and strong enough to tear an elephant in half. As it was, when I saw him, he was clearly very old and moving quite slowly. But there was no man in the world who could take him on in a fight. This first sighting all happened so fast that I didn't have time to wake anybody up. But I did once the creatures were gone. I told Shorty and Smokey that I had seen a big Tommyknocker and that it was friends with a puppy. Let me try to remember exactly how I told them, because that was my first impression, before I had the idea that this might be a family of dogmen or werewolves I was seeing. Back then I didn't know what it was, but I'll tell you what I remember looking at. The big one. This was an old creature. It was well past its prime, and I imagine it was mainly putting in the effort of sticking around to help the young one get a good start in life. I once read that some animals will keep growing larger the longer they live. Maybe this guy was like that. That's what I was kind of referring to earlier. If he was that huge when he was still his strongest, I bet he would be able to run really fast, and I bet he had an appetite, when he was younger, that demanded he eat as much as some entire wolf packs. But maybe he was never this large when he was fast and young and strong. Maybe the size only came with age and slowness, I just don't know. This was a creature with hands and thumbs, and arms and shoulders like a man, but covered in a light-colored fur that seemed to have a dark undercoat possibly. I remember dark patches where fur was missing. Maybe the flesh was dark black, and the fur light blonde, I don't know. Maybe the old beast was mangy and missing fur, or maybe I was seeing something else each time, like black stains on the fur. I don't really know, because every sighting was unexpected. Every sighting came in odd lighting at dawn or at night, and none of the experiences lasted very long as they were happening. As slow-moving as the Tommyknocker Dogman seemed to be, he still never stuck around for very long. By the way, I'm the only one who called him a Tommyknocker. I'm not trying to say that's what he was. I'm just saying that was the one monster I had heard of living in western PA, the Tommyknocker, and so I thought that's what this was. No, this looked like the Bumble from TV, but with more of a werewolf-type head. It was dog-like or wolf-like, but it was the head of a monster man. It was taller than a dog head, more like a human head in that sense, but it had the dog snout, the black dog nose, the upright dog ears. Both the adult and the pup had black eyes that sometimes glowed a sort of golden-orange color. It was off and on, though. They mainly looked like black eyes, but they would catch reflections and absolutely look like paranormal creatures from hell when they did. That was about the only similarity between the two creatures, really. Well, I mean, the little one had upright ears also, and the coloring was very similar. It was a dog, but an ordinary one. It just ran around on the ground yipping and yapping. I mean, my first impression was that this was the pet of the larger creature. But when my family started to see the two of them together more often, they all got the general impression that this was a family that they were viewing. My family felt that the little pup was going to grow up to have hands and arms and shoulders, just like the big Bumble that it walked around with and on whose shoulder it rode. We moved out of there before the year was over. We never got to see that happen. So it just remains a theory of the period. Maybe the little dog was just a little dog. To my family, though, it was a big werewolf and his grandson. That was the interpretation that got cemented into our family folklore. My dad's friend Smokey had actually come from a logging family in the Midwest, and he brought with him stories of the Midwestern Dogman. I read online recently that loggers back in the day liked to scare newbies with stories of imaginary local monsters in those woods. But Smokey never got any memo about them being made up or imaginary critters. Oh sure, some of them he knew were pranks like the hodag. But Smokey was convinced that there were real werewolves in the forests of the Midwest, and that one of them had strayed over to western Pennsylvania with his yappy little grandson. I don't know enough to say that Smokey was wrong, but I don't know enough to prove that he was right either. One time the creatures walked through a muddy patch and I bugged my parents about making plaster casts of the footprints. They didn't know what I was talking about. We had some cement mix left over from a building project my dad had done earlier, so I made some cement mix on my own and I poured it all over the footprints. Well, when my mother saw what I had done to her backyard, she had my father break it up and throw it all away in the trash. It was like talking to a wall trying to explain to them that the footprints might be valuable to science, or whatever it was I was saying. So I hadn't done it the right way, and you couldn't really see what that was in the concrete I had poured. That was not the right way to do things, but I was a kid, and at least I was trying. After Smokey and Shorty moved out of the barn, but before Dad and Smokey got new jobs and moved us all again, my mother had a few sightings of the two beasts, which she was deathly afraid of. Personally, I thought that the pup looked friendly, and the only reason I hadn't tried to make friends with him was that the adult was so intimidatingly large. But my mother told me to stay away from that small one. She was convinced that he was the same species as the large one, and that he was not as sweet as he might have looked from a distance. She told me wild animals are wild, and they are animals. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it was a simple point that I was missing. I was assuming the pup would act like a puppy from the pet shop. That was probably a very bad assumption. Of course, I never did get to test Mom's hypothesis. For all I know, the dogman picked the puppy up at the pet shop, who's to say? Whatever the nature of their relationship, I do know that the big creature clearly cared for the small one. My mother told me one story of something she saw that horrified her. I was not personally upset by this. I found the story sort of charming, in fact. Tell me how you would react if you saw what my mom saw. She was walking back from the market at around sundown, and she saw the two pale canine creatures off in the woods a ways. Frightened to see them so close to our home, Mom decided that she wanted to see what they were up to. She hid behind some foliage and peeked out at the two animals. What my mother said she saw was the little dog chasing a squirrel back and forth in a patch of woods. When the squirrel scrambled up the trunk of a tree onto a branch, the big dogman picked the little one up and put him on the branch too. And then the squirrel ran inside a hole in the tree, and that little puppy ran into the tree after him. Now to me, this was a funny story because I was a young boy like the little dogman. To my mother, who for whatever reason identified with squirrels, this was a horror story of the most terrifying kind. I wanted Mom to tell me what happened next, but what happened next was my mother ran home in tears, sad about what might have happened to that squirrel. She didn't stick around to see what would happen next. Her day had already been ruined. She felt genuinely unsafe with that abominable dogman living nearby, but I didn't see any evidence that he would cause trouble if left unprovoked. I kind of admired him. It was like having a local celebrity around. I didn't think he would hurt a human except in self-defense or in defense of his pup. My mother, however, was not so sure. There is only one anecdote which seems to speak to this, and it's not something that happened to anyone directly related to me. In fact, I don't even remember the guy's name. I only met him one time, and we had one conversation. Him and my father and me, over the front gate of our house one Saturday. My father and I were out cutting the grass and pruning hedges and so forth on that day. Well, my dad was doing that and I was assisting. This guy came by asking us really weird questions, like did we have a polar bear living around there? And did we know if werewolves were real or just in the movies? Now, anyone else might have thought this guy was having a bad trip, but my dad and I knew exactly what this stranger was gibbering about, and so we went over to talk to him. It seems he was wondering if he had lost his mind. He had been making a delivery to a house, and when he went to get back in his truck, there was a puppy inside the cab, on the passenger seat. It was like he was ready to help him make deliveries. Wondering who this cute puppy belonged to, the delivery guy looked around, but the only person he saw was this little old lady who looked like she was having trouble walking back to a house. She was holding onto a big pale dog who provided strength and steadiness for her walk. The big dog was similarly colored to the puppy, so the delivery guy wondered if maybe the old lady was the actual owner. My father and I knew who that old lady was, but we had no idea she had any dogs at all. The driver got his stuff in order and planned to drive the puppy over to the old lady's house once he saw she had gotten home safe. But once he saw the old lady go inside, he saw something else that caused him to doubt everything, including his sanity. Once the dog had walked the old woman safely inside her home, he turned around and stood up on his hind legs like a man. Then he began walking back toward the road in the way a human being would walk. The driver said his knees gave out underneath him, and he sat on the road, back to one of his truck's tires, and he watched helplessly as the huge beast lumbered over to his truck. The driver said he felt like his life was about to end, that the abominable Dogman was going to stomp him out of existence. Step by step, the huge Dogman got closer, seeming larger with each step, but instead of attacking the man, the beast just reached one incredibly long arm into the cab of his truck and retrieved the little puppy. He placed the pup on his shoulder, and the two lumbered off into the woods together. The driver decided he had lost his mind, and it would be unsafe to drive while schizo. He started wandering down the road instead. We lived 3 blocks from where he left his truck. Poor guy was really in a state of shock. The delivery driver told us that he had just seen all this, and that he was insane. Dad told him he wasn't insane. I said I was wondering how that old lady got around. The poor woman was in such feeble shape. Dad and I told the guy that his story made total sense to us, and then he started to look at us like we were the crazy ones. Eventually, he seemed to calm down enough to start walking back to his truck and resuming his day, but I still think he thought Dad and I were bonkers. My point in including that man's story is that it demonstrates that Mom was wrong about the big old Dogman. He was not a man-eater, or certainly he would have eaten that weak old lady who could barely walk and see and hear. Instead, the Dogman helped her to survive. So he might have been big enough to be a monster, but he didn't have the heart of a monster. He had the heart of a Dogman. Just when you think that John is gone, you find he's going on and on. Now, I don't mean just any John, I only mean John Carnagan. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, John Carnagan, who donated to us using Super Chat on YouTube. Thanks, John. You're one of the good ones. John is also a channel member who gets to see our perks, and if you want to find out about that, just listen to what this next guy has to say. Henry? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
back for more scary stories.